Good evening and thank you for joining us this fourth day of December 2016. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole and our sign language interpreter is William Silla. Tonight, the country is staring at a crisis in the public health sector after the government failed to avert a planned strike by doctors and nurses despite a high-level meeting at Afya House. Now, Treasury and Ministry of Health officials are said to have met over the strike, even as doctors' union officials denied being invited to the meeting. Doctors and nurses are now set to down their tools in a few hours, even after the Employment and Labor Relations Court suspended the planned industrial action. Now, we understand that Afya House has called for a press conference this evening, in fact, this night, and we're waiting on that announcement. We don't know what it'll be. Either they will be declaring the strike illegal or they will be announcing perhaps, some agreement in the talks to perhaps avert this strike that is set to begin hours from now. The pictures you are seeing on screen are our cameras at Afya House, where an urgent press conference has been called this evening. We will take you there live should that happen in the course of Checkpoint. So stay with us for the latest on that looming strike. Tomorrow we'll also have a package for you on the same in just a short while from now, right here on Checkpoint. Our focus on corruption continues here on KTN News. Now, there is public outrage following fresh revelations from the Auditor General's report that 273 out of the 290 elected MPs in Kenya cannot fully account for a total 4 billion shillings. The report reveals that this amount was lost or stolen in the MP's first year in office. Mark Namaswa has the details.
A report by the Auditor General Edward Ouko indicates current MPs looted or wasted 3.85 billion shillings from the CDF kit in their first year in office in 2013. Nearly all regions across Kenya have been represented in the misuse of public funds. In Nairobi, the Dagoretti North constituency under Honorable Simba Arati cannot account for 74.8 million shillings lost in 2013 alone. Others being Starehe, Embakasi North and Kamkunji constituencies. In the Rift Valley, Samuel Moroto's Kapenguria constituency takes the lead, where some 63.4 million shillings cannot be traced. Samburu North and Subukia constituencies are also mired in the same dilemma. The Mount Kenya region also found a slot on the infamous list. Francis Kigos Gatundu North reportedly losing 76 million. Kirinyaga Central and Buri constituencies also making the list. The bastions of opposition politics, Nyanza and Western Kenya, through MPs Aduma Award of Nyakach, could not satisfy the Auditor General of the whereabouts of 69.8 million. Nyando, Lurambi, Malava and Likuyani also joining the queue. Ukambani and the coastal region also took their turn. Mavoko constituency led by Patrick Makau losing 33.9 million. Matungulu, Kangundo, Nyali and Msambweni also getting listed. And this has not escaped the attention of fellow as well as named legislators.
It does not matter whether you are a governor. I think the most important thing as a leader who has resources, you must manage your resources and be accountable to those resources.
Most of those members of parliament have no direct influence over CDF. CDF ni pesa ambao unachukua kwa shule, unawacha check kama ni ya 1 million na unaondoka.
The Northeastern region through Isiolo North legislator Joseph Lomwa lost 99 million shillings in 2013. The trend spreading to Lafey, Banisa and Garissa Township constituency, captained by Parliament Majority Leader Aden Duale.
Wengi wao pesa yao ni kujifaidisha wenyewe na marafiki zao. Si ati ndiye ya kusaidia mwananchi.
Nikiangalia hii naona watu wote wamekula hii pesa. Na wangefaa warudisha hii pesa. Manake hii pesa imerudisha nchi yetu nyuma sana.
The monies reportedly started vanishing soon after Treasury disbursed the 23 billion to the CDF kitty. The most common tactics used by MPs were through employing relatives, fictitious sitting allowances, and financing seminars. In Gideon Mungaro's Kilifi North constituency, 2.5 million was withdrawn, then the CDF team deleted the transaction from all records. In David Weres Matungu constituency, a chemist won and was paid for a road graveling contract. But some legislators are not taking the dossier lying down.
Mimi Oscar Sudi, nataka watume auditors kutoka pembe zote la Kenya. Na wakipata hata shilingi 10 Oscar Sudi alichukua, siwezi simama na nifungwe.
The audit reports have surfaced at a time the fate of the CDF kitty lies in the hands of the Court of Appeal, expected to make a ruling whether CDF should be scrapped or not come February 2017. Among the few perceivably clean constituencies in the reports are Sotik, Rarieda and Gem. Mark Namaswa, KTN News.
Court leader Raila Odinga is asking church leaders to interrogate the source of money donated for their projects. Speaking in Kericho, Raila said the church leaders cannot continue to hide their heads in the sand even as they receive funds that may well be linked to corruption.
Wakenya wako justified to complain that the taxes that they are producing, they are contributing to the government, is not being properly utilized. Hapo pekee yake ni tofauti. Lakini hapo sisi sote tuko pamoja na kanisa. Sawa. Na kanisa vilevile muulize kama mtu amekuja na mifundo ya pesa, hiyo pesa ametoa wapi? Na mshahara yake ile inajulikana ni kama.
A woman in Uasin Gishu County now wants the government to take action against the chief of Kaptuktuk village for allegedly turning her life into a nightmare. Elizabeth claims the chief sold her only piece of land together with her in-laws, something that the area chief has denied. Elvis Koskei now reports.
Meet Elizabeth Korir, a widow and a mother of 10 living in abject poverty, after she was allegedly thrown out of her own home by Chief Simon Kip Korir of Kaptutuk village, who collaborated with their sister-in-law. At the village, we are confronted by the Ambola board, where the family are hosted by neighbors.
Vitu yangu iliharibiwa kabisa. Sina chochote sahi. Iliharibiwa vitu mingi sana. Si kwa mtu yenye siko najiweza. Tulikuwa tunajiweza lakini vitu yetu yote iliharibiwa. Mnunuzi alikuja akapomoa nyumba saa 12 asubuhi kama chai iko kwa moto, hata watoto wakapotea tu wa kwenda tena shule. Kila kitu mpaka hata ID sina, kila kitu sina.
Elizabeth lived happily with her husband after 23 years in marriage and strongly believed she was a member of the family and deserved all the rights, including inheritance.
Ulisa huyo mama ananipigia simu ananiambia ati utanifanyia nini? Utanifanyia nini mimi? Mimi niko na milioni 4. Mimi ni misisang na mimi ni mandaka. Utanifanyia nini? Wewe ujihurumia na hiyo masikini yako na shilingi 2 yako hiyo yenye uko nayo.
Things, however, turned out differently for Elizabeth Chebet Korir, who was married to Simon Kip Korir Musonik after the latter passed on in 2011 following a short illness.
Na siwezi enda hata kama ni point moja itanitosha. Nikaambia hata mnisaidie tu kaburi peke yake. Tandaze. Na nichenge nyumba hapo na niishi na watoto. Ndio huyu mnunuzi sasa ndio alikuja akachukua matresi yangu akaenda akachomea hapo kwa kaburi.
Akachoma matresi?
Alichoma, alienda akachomea kwa kaburi ya mzee wangu.
Nilikuwa form 2. Ningekuwa nimemaliza form 4. Sasa vile niliacha shule nikaona yani life imekuwa ngumu sana.
Saa ile kama nakisha bomoa nyumba, hawa hii ameenda anaanza kuenda kuchukua biombo ile ilikuwa hawa hiyo nalalia, naenda kuchoma kwa huko kwa kaburi, paka kaburi sijui kama naungua ndani, sijui kama naungua juu.
However, on September 16, 2013, Chebet was shocked when she was served by a notice to vacate the land.
Machibi yetu na TTC hajasikia maneno yake. Tunataka tu serikali asikise maneno yao saidie. Kuhusu arudishe hiyo shamba.
Chief Kip Korir, when asked about the matter, alleged that alternative land was purchased for Chebet and 20,000 shillings for relocation given to her. Comments which the latter strongly dismissed and accused the administrator of being impartial.
Wakaongea naye, wakakubaliana, akapewa 20,000 ya kusaidia kuhama. After that, asa anageuka hajasaidiwa, hajafanyiwa chochote, hata sisi tunashangaa.
So naomba tu serikali wanisaidie tu, wanirudishe tu kwa mji wangu, mahali mzee wangu tu alilalishwa.
The family now wants President Uhuru Kenyatta to intervene. Elvis Kosgei, KTN News, Kaptuktuk Village, Uasin Gishu County.
And right here on KTN News, our focus on corruption and accountability continues, as you've seen from the stories we've aired tonight. My take will also be on that, and it's focusing a little bit on some of your feedback. You don't want to miss that. But before that, our discussion tonight is with the CEO of Inuka Trust, John Githongo. You've known him for a long time in this country. People still refer to him as the anti-corruption czar. We'll be hearing his insights on matters corruption in this country, whether the war on corruption, and just what will it take to solve this issue once and for all. John Githongo will be my guest on Checkpoint in just a short while. Keep your comments coming in. The hashtag is Checkpoint. You can use 47 days of accountability if you like on Twitter. You can also send us a text message 22155. That is coming up. Please do stay with us for that discussion on corruption with John Githongo in just a short while. All right, now we want to bring you the top story tonight, and it's about the crisis in the public health sector after the government failed to avert a planned strike by doctors and nurses despite a high-level meeting that took place at Afia House a little earlier on today. Now, we understand a press conference has been called about this health workers' strike. We are waiting on word on that. The Cabinet Secretary for Health, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, and Sarah Serem from the Salaries and Remunerations Commission will be addressing journalists in just a short while. We will bring you that press conference live, should it happen, during the course of this live newscast here on Checkpoint. We're waiting on that. But in the meantime, please take a look at this story we prepared for you here on this issue.
On the 5th of December 2016, kindly make necessary arrangements, kindly ensure that emergency services are attended to in private hospitals that are next to you.
Keen to avert a crisis in the health sector, Health Cabinet Secretary Cleopas Mailu, Principal Secretary Nicholas Muraguri, Treasury CS Henry Rotich, PS Kamau Duge, and Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service Joseph Kenywa spent the better part of Sunday afternoon at Afia House in talks over the impending doctors' strike, just hours to the lapse of the 21-day strike notice given by the Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union. Union officials claim they did not get any formal invitation to the meeting. The doctors want the government to honor a June 2013 collective bargaining agreement signed between the Ministry of Health and the Doctors Union.
We want doctors to be paid as per the agreement that we signed in 2013. And this collective bargaining agreement also talks about staffing issues, talks about internship issues, which have been a very big problem at the county level.
The Employment and Labor Relations Court on Friday suspended the doctors' strike for 30 days to allow for negotiations on issues arising from the CBA. And the effect of the doctors' strike may be heavily felt at the coast. The Mombasa County Government's Health Department, in a notice to chief officers in Kwale, Kilifi, Lamu, Taita Taveta and Tana River counties, says there should be no referrals from the 5 counties to the Coast General Hospital. Nurses too are set to go on strike beginning Monday. The nurses want harmonization of salaries and pay grades. Unlike the doctors whose CBA has been signed, how to address the nurses' concerns is still being discussed. On Friday, following an application by the Council of Governors, the Employment and Labor Relations Court stopped the nurses' strike pending the hearing of the application on the 13th of this month. But the nurses will hear none of that.
Hakuna kazi itaendelea katika zahanati zote. Ni zahanati ama inaitwa namna gani? Katika zahanati zote za umma humu nchini kuanzia saa 5:59 ama saa 6:01 tarehe 5. lakini tunakubali mazungumzo na serikali.
Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service Joseph Kenywa last week wrote to the chairman of the Council of Governors, citing frequent strikes by nurses and doctors and urging the council to address issues such as medical insurance cover, access to mortgage and car loans, and respect for return to work formula. The Council of Governors has called a meeting between the Ministry of Health, Salaries Review Commission, Nurses Union officials, and chairpersons of county public service boards. The Monday meeting is expected to address the harmonization of nurses' salaries. With the national government and the Council of Governors yet to find a way to appease doctors and nurses, Kenyans may be staring at a paralysis of health services in public hospitals across the country. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
The planned construction of dry ports outside Mombasa, in Naivasha and Eldoret continues to attract criticism from opposition leaders at the coast. The concept has been described by the leaders as a ploy by the state to marginalize the coast region economically. Mombasa Governor Hassan Ali Joho is now leading a campaign to have the state reverse the move, which he says will cripple port business at the coast of Kenya.
Bomani grounds Likoni. The ODM Coast Brigade was in full swing here to meet the people. Here, the opposition was setting the climate for a discussion that is likely to stick out in the next couple of weeks. The proposed dry ports of Naivasha and Eldoret. A new headache that luminaries are now calling a scheme to marginalize the region economically. And Mombasa Governor Ali Hassan Joho is taking the subject to another level.
Sisi mukija na mradi ambaye haueleweki wa kupora rasilimali za watu wetu, tutasimama imara kwamba watu wetu hawawezi kudhulumiwa kamwe.
Proponents of the concept say the dry ports will reduce congestion in Mombasa and also ensure port efficiency. Joho says the dry port will transfer key services to the two towns, thereby causing massive job losses in Mombasa at the port and at the container freight stations.
Wametembea huko maeneo ya Central Kenya, na kila mahali walipoenda walikuwa wanaweka mradi mkubwa wa bilioni. Every place. Huku kwetu wakija wanasemanga meet the people tour. Wakienda kwao development tour.
Some industry experts, however, say there was no reason to worry given the dry port is aimed to decongest the port of Mombasa and what will make the largest port in the region operate even more effectively. The leaders are not convinced.
Tukianza kuongea ya kwa mukipeleka bandari ya Mombasa sehemu ya Naivasha, watu wa Mombasa watakosa ajira, watu wataingia katika maasi na mabaya. If that is what qualifies the governor of Mombasa to be called an academic dwarf, then we stick with the academic dwarf and you go home where you belong.
The topic marginalization will be stretched to the vexing land question at the coast of Kenya. Several years since Kenya attained independence, the region is fighting the ghosts from the past.
Ikiwa unazunguka Kenya nzima ukipeana pesa za maendeleo, sisi kama wapwani hatutaki pesa. Tutotaka sisi ni umiliki wa ardhi zetu.
Tunawaambia wachaneni na uongozi, na kama mtawacha 2017 tutawaachisha kwa lazima.
Na mimi nasikia ati wanasema watakuja kupambana na mimi Mombasa. I am ready for you, my friend.
Kenya's best.
Ati tutakuja Mombasa tuone tumeangusha Joho, njoo leo wewe.
And in the scheme of things, there is no doubt that the marginalization topic will feature strongly in the run-up to next year's general elections. Dry ports are an extension of the port and provide storage for goods for import or export. Currently, KPA runs a dry port at Embakasi, Nairobi, which is fully operational, and Eldoret and Kibos in Kisumu are still dormant. The proposed construction of the dry port at Naivasha continues to ignite storm here in the coast region. And now the leadership feels that it's a scheme to marginalize the coast region economically. Francis Otomwa, KTN News, Mombasa.
Deputy President William Ruto is warning politicians against inciting Kenyans to violence ahead of the 2017 general election. Ruto was speaking in West Pokot where he called for patriotism, saying all Kenyans have an obligation to ensure a free and fair election.
nobody should give conditions to Kenyans that unless this and that happens, there will be this or that violence. That is unacceptable. All of us must commit ourselves to having free, fair, peaceful elections. It is what we owe our country, all of us. We owe it to Kenya to have a peaceful election and a peaceful country. Na sote tufanye kazi kwa pamoja. Ni sisi pia ambao tutasaidia IEBC. We must give the IEBC a legal framework that is practical, that gives them the best opportunity to deliver a credible election. It is our responsibility. It's the responsibility of Parliament, it's the responsibility of us in the executive, it is the responsibility of those running political parties, that we create the necessary law to enable IEBC to deliver a credible, peaceful, and transparent election.
All right, let's cross over to Afya House now. Cabinet Secretary, Finance, Health, and Sarah Serem from the SRC speaking on the looming strike by health workers tomorrow. This is coming to you live here on Checkpoint. Let's listen in.
The declared doctor strike, which we have been discussing the whole day. But before I say our position, I want to introduce those who are around the table. Of course, I'm with my colleague, Henry Rotich, who is the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury. On my left, we have Governor Ongwae, who is indeed the Chair of the Human Resource of the Council of Governors, who has been with us the whole day. And on his left is the CEO of the Council of Governors, and Mr. Njoroge, who is the Director of Human Resource Management in the Ministry. On the right of Henry Rotich is Geoffrey Mwau from the Treasury. And we have Dr. Nicholas Muraguri, who is the PS in the Ministry of Health, and Dr. Kyoko, who is the Director of Medical Services. Just as a means of background, of course, I know that the ministry sometimes in 2013 signed a collective bargaining agreement with the doctors, which has been subject of court proceedings for some time. And sometimes in October 6th, the court ruled that we go back to the drawing board and we engage in discussions about that collective bargaining. If you may recall, that collective bargaining agreement was signed at the point of devolution, and therefore a new structure of government for central government, that is the national government and the county government, had come to effect. And therefore, this collective bargaining agreement could not be registered then without the input of the county governments. Now, this process has gone on in court until that ruling was given, and the court gave the parties who are enjoined in that petition 90 days from October 6th up to January 5th to be able to discuss and come up with an agreement which can lead to registration of a collective bargaining agreement with the industrial court. Now, first, that process is not complete because the 90 days are not yet over. We initiated discussions with the doctors, with committees to be able to continue with the deliberations so that we can meet the ruling of the court. But along the way, the doctors kind of negated on the discussions and gave us 21 notice for strike, which comes to effect in midnight. Further discussions with them led to an understanding that today we shall be meeting at 5:30 to be able to take further that discussion and perhaps come to a conclusion to be able to avert the strike and also to move forward with the negotiations as stipulated in the ruling of the court. During those discussions, of course, the Minister of Health or the national government involved the county, and that is why we have been with Governor Ongwae all through those discussions. On our part, we have consulted widely with the National Treasury, the SRC, the Public Service Commission, and other agencies or stakeholders who could give input to come to a conclusion on that matter. Let me say, all along we were negotiating in good faith, and we still believe that it is not necessary for doctors to go on strike. Now, part of that ruling and part of that collective bargaining recognized that there was harmonization of the scheme of service and the grading or a job evaluation which was being done by the national government to be able to bring harmony within the public service. And that agreement did recognize that any conclusion to that CBA should take into consideration the input of SRC and in particular the conclusion of the job evaluation exercise, which has been now concluded, and discussions have taken in various levels of government. It has come to effect last week and is in the process of implementation. And therefore, this is a document which is in the knowledge of the doctors and knowledge of anybody in the public service. That document will be able to guide us as we move forward. And therefore, any engagement we are going to have with the doctors should take into consideration that document, which is a government document, which is recognized both at national level and the county level as a tool which can be able to harmonize how we conduct business, the grading of staff in the public sector, and also making sure there is compensation based on each job. Therefore, the tools are there for us to be able to engage. What we were looking forward this evening is to be able to meet the doctors' negotiation committee to be able to come to a conclusion of this process. Now, of concern is the notice they gave, which in our view was premature because we had not completed the 90 days which were given by the court, and secondly was preemptive of the process which government has taken 3 years to develop a document which is going to form the basis of upgrading public servants and also compensating them effectively. Therefore, we still believe. We do not know the reason why they didn't come. We can only infer that they are meeting and consulting, and we shall continue to extend the goodwill for negotiation until this process is concluded. What I can say, I hope that services within our public institutions, both hospitals and health centers across the country, will not be disrupted by any action which can cause suffering to patients. And therefore, I appeal to clinicians, doctors, and other health workers to continue providing services to Kenyans wherever they are employed to do so, recognizing that the national government and the county governments are committed to the process of having sound industrial harmony within their areas of operation. As we speak, I'm aware that the county public service boards are meeting in Mombasa to be able to come up with a common framework to be able to deal with the issues of collective bargaining agreement and understanding between the doctors and nurses and other cadres within the counties, so that we do not have a disjointed process of engaging with the health workers within the county government under the umbrella of the Council of Governors. That effort is commendable, and we believe it will give us a framework of engagement. I want also to say that that group is also discussing recognition agreements for the various unions which exist within the health sector. Therefore, there is effort within the government collectively to be able to address the plight of health workers. I think any other reason which I might have been, put forward by the clinicians or the nurses is not the correct position, and therefore our doors still remain open for discussions tomorrow and the day after to be able to come to a conclusion of this weighty matter, which we believe, if they carry their threat, then it will not be in good faith because we are prepared to be able to engage and also come out with a permanent solution to the problem which is affecting the sector. The presence of the various agencies of government here today is an indication of that commitment, and I think at that point maybe I will allow Governor Ongwae, who is representing the Council of Governors and indeed the counties, to just give his perspective, and then thereafter ask the Cabinet Secretary and National Treasury, Henry, to be able also to give his perspective on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The two Cabinet Secretaries who are here, the members of the Fourth Estate who have come at night. It's now 9 o'clock, a few minutes past 9 o'clock. I do want to say that as a governor,
All right, that is that presser coming to you live only here on KTN News, where you get the whole story. That presser from Afia House, and it is being addressed by the Cabinet Secretary for Health. We understand the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury is also there, Governor Ongwae, just speaking there. Let me just recap for you what the Cabinet Secretary Health, Cleopa Mailu, said, that there was a meeting at 5:30 p.m. He says health union officials were invited. They did not come. He's appealing to health workers to continue providing services and calls their notice for a strike premature. The health workers officials, on the other hand, say they were not aware of a meeting that was taking place this evening. Well, we see what happens tomorrow morning, even as the health workers continue to insist that their strike is on. We're focusing on corruption here, and not just at the county level, at the national level, at all levels, and we want to have that conversation now. Joining me tonight on the show is the CEO of Inuka Trust, John Githongo, a face that is known very well in this country in the war on graft. Thank you for making the time to be with us on Checkpoint. So I'd like to start off by asking whether corruption is really on the rise, particularly in this administration, or if it's a perception, or perhaps we're just reporting about it more, analyzing it more. What's your sense with corruption under this administration and, over the last couple of years?
My own sense, I've been involved in anti-corruption for about a decade now, 2 decades now. Corruption's never been worse in Kenya. And one has to keep in mind that corruption is 50% perception. It's a corruption that when you ask for a bribe, or when you have to pay a bribe to get a document that you experience on a day-to-day basis that informs your attitude towards it. And across the country there's this feeling that we have a very permissive climate that has been allowed by our leaders for, I wouldn't actually call it corruption anymore. It's plunder, where with impunity, people in positions of public trust, and it's now even in the private sector, people are involving themselves in theft of public funds. We call it corruption, but if you look at some of the scandals that you have been reporting about on KTN, that's not really corruption. It's blatant, outright theft, where people are basically going into government budgets and extracting resources, confident that actually nothing's going to happen. It'll be reported on KTN, in the newspapers, we'll make some noise about it, we'll talk about it on Twitter, but actually at the end of the day, people go to court, they bounce from one court to the other, and then the thing will finish there. And this sense of impunity has never been this bad. Those who research corruption, the different civil society and other research organizations that focus on this issue also indicate that it's never been this bad in Kenya, and that attitudes of Kenyans with regard to corruption have never been this bad. So that's why I'm very clear that it's never been this bad. From what I can see, also what I read and what I'm told by the experts.
Now, on many occasions, you've said the president is not believable, in the fight against corruption. But, others beg to disagree and say, look, he's done quite a bit. When those allegations of corruption against members of his cabinet, we saw unprecedented persons, being interdicted, and, several of them are still in court facing charges on that. That is ensured the agencies have the resources that they've asked for. Is this really about the president? And, what more can he possibly do if he has not done enough? Some say he's done all he could do. I mean, at State House, we now remember that famous, or is it an infamous statement of, sasa nifanye nini, because he talked about his frustrations. So is it about him? If so, what more can he do to prove to Kenyans or to you that he's, committed to the war on corruption?
That was an unfortunate statement by His Excellency the President for him to demonstrate his despair to the Kenyan people about something that he has claimed to take so seriously, and to do it publicly in that sort of way. He is a president. The elected, he's the sworn leader of this country. And so for him to take that kind of position is unfortunate. What's clear is two things. Number one, we've gone through about 20 years in Kenya of a lot of trying to fix corruption using technical reform, policy reform. So lots of task forces, lots of multi-stakeholder meetings, lots of reports have been published, lots of commissions have been established, different organs of government have been created, lots of benchmarking with what other people are doing in other parts of the world. Yeah. Our anti-corruption authorities in their various permutations have been everywhere. Recently, the Attorney General was even in China, seeing what they're doing in China. So we've reached the glass ceiling in terms of what we can do within our constitution in terms of technical fixes for corruption. What is required is basically the political will to drive it. And I think that's where both President and the Deputy President, despite all the rhetoric that they put out, are failing. And the failure, in my opinion, can be fixed fairly quickly. President is a person of great political capacity. He's got the political skills to reach where he has reached. So I'm sure he can turn it around. Kenyans don't believe him. When the deputy...
Why don't they, though?
Well, I'll explain that. Same thing with the Deputy President. Deputy President says, we are going to fight corruption. People laugh. Kenyans laugh. Why? Why is this? And I think that this needs to be fixed by what they do themselves. I think that we need to reach a point where issues of conflict of interest amongst the President, Deputy President, Cabinet Secretaries, Principal Secretaries, and other senior officials are dealt with fairly quickly. That the business interests of these individuals, their families, their wives and children, sisters and brothers, are subjected to a thorough audit. Because most of our politicians at the top level, even in the opposition, are business people at the same time and are doing business with government. And that's where it's a slippery slope into people getting involved in kind of scandals that we've been reading about at the Devolution Ministry, NYS, Ministry of Health, and the like. And because of that, people don't believe. You say, these people are talking, but quietly we know people close to them wanapora mali. Not just involved in corruption, but looting public coffers.
All right, so let me put you on the spot. Civil society groups have raised issues with the president, what's happening at the national level, but it's said that you do not apply the same fervor to what's happening at the county level, and perhaps, in places where, we see the opposition is not the opposition in counties that are run by court governors, and that is what we're highlighting, over the next couple of days, now a month now, with 47 days of accountability. And some say civil society is very quick to talk about what the president should not be doing, but we do not hold, others to the same standard. We do not hold court leader Raila Odinga and, his co-principals to the same standard, and that this is happening not just at the national level, but everywhere.
It's happening. I mean, I think they're all held to the same standard. And, when I talk about issues of conflict of interest and taking, because we need to return some legitimacy and credibility to these people. They are our leaders. And that's lost now. There's been a degradation of public trust in them and what they say about this particular issue. And what you do to return that public confidence are the kind of measures that I was talking about. Now, when you go to the counties, we've also devolved corruption. And therefore, we have corruption at the county level that that you've been reporting very ably. I think civil society is very involved at that level as well, and in fact has had a bit more cooperation than at the national level.
In what sense?
In that civil society organizations are able to work in counties and conduct social audits with together with county officials and leaders. Slightly more easy. It's more easy in some counties than in others. But that doesn't mean that we don't take seriously the fact that there is corruption at that level, and I think it's important that the issue is being raised, not only with regard to the counties, but also the opposition. There's another thing that's interesting about the counties, and I'm sure you've reported this yourself, and I've seen it in the print press, of senior county officials being held to account by ordinary wananchi on the ground very directly. We had in Kisumu recently, I think it was a member of the county assembly whose home was burned down, and he was accused of corruption by the local community. We had in Embu some months ago photographs published in the papers of the speaker flying over a fence because he was being chased by citizens who were unhappy about the non-payment of contractors. So there's a sense of local accountability in the counties that doesn't exist at the national level. And that is something which is, I think, a positive development, and one which makes life a bit easier, even when civil society is engaging at that level.
Okay, I know you've talked about, a lot of the collaboration that's happening. But have we had some serious press conferences from members of civil society to say, hey, Raila, what's happening in areas of CORD, or hey, Governor so-and-so in these areas? Because like you mentioned, corruption is a perception, so is the fight against it. And some would say, civil society is hell-bent on painting the national government in one light, but not raising the same levels on the other. Talking about the cooperation that you are talking about. But just to be extremely, more outspoken, or as outspoken as we see with what's happening with NYS devolution, for example?
First of all, Yvonne, I mean, if billions of dollars of Kenyan taxpayers' money are disappearing or can't be accounted for by national government, it's a responsibility of responsible citizens, not even just civil society organizations, to take that extremely seriously. When you look at the level of debt that has been accumulated in this country, both foreign and domestic debt by national government, it's unprecedented. We've never had this kind of situation before. So I think it is extremely serious. The issues that I raised with regard to accountability and the kind of measures that can be taken apply to everybody. If you look in the opposition and you look in national government and you look at the top leadership, they've all been in each other's parties at one point or the other. They've all been in the same boat, and it's sort of hopping from one boat to the other. So when one talks of leadership, one is talking about them all, but then one focuses one's attention at the place where you can see the greatest harm is being done before our own eyes, and at tremendous speed, at a speed that we have never seen before in our country. Even if you just look at just a foreign debt, its accumulation and the sense in which it has been looted from public coffers, that is something that is an emergency that requires urgent attention. So one doesn't dodge the fact that there is corruption also amongst the opposition. Yeah. The fact is, the opposition doesn't have the capacity is not in government, so they don't spend that much.
But surely they should have to be able to exhibit an intolerance to corruption.
Absolutely.
Even at their level, in their own small way.
Absolutely.
Perhaps, summon a governor to the party headquarters and say, we've looked at the Auditor General's reports and there's some mischief happening here, but we've not seen that.
In their own counties. In their own counties. And I think that that's an issue which has to be taken seriously. You've also had members of the opposition who've been mentioned with regard regard to some of the major scandals.
Absolutely.
And so one would like to see the kind of action that has been taken with regard to the national government, taken with regard to the opposition as well. My own sense is when I look at, for example, what has happened in Kilifi, where in fairly quick action was taken by the governor there when evidence of corruption was brought to light. That's a positive development, and so you have positive developments taking place also in some of the Jubilee counties. So and you've been going around all the different counties, and I'm sure you found that across the board you have good ones and bad ones in the opposition and in the ruling party. So it's not as if one is
or similar issues even across the countries, regardless of that. Yeah, I'd like to stay with the counties for just a moment before we move on. What's your sense? Because you mentioned civil society has been working with, the county governments. What's your sense? Some people say, look, it might not necessarily be willful theft, but it just could be a serious issue when it comes to capacity towards, the audit process and following that, the Public Finance Management Act, the government regulations on finance, the SRC regulations, for example, as regards sittings and how the audit process works and that sort of thing. Do you get the sense that it's a capacity problem? If so, what are we doing about it? Or is this proper outright willful theft and circumnavigation of the rules?
You have a bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, devolution is new. The capacity in the counties, even county leaders themselves, and governors, have actually at a point raised issues that we have deficiencies, major deficiencies, and so they have had leakages and corruption that takes place. And when one investigates it, one can see that there are cases of tremendous incompetence in the way money is allocated, spent, and accounted for. And that is not perhaps so surprising when one considers that this is new to Kenya, and we're asking these units to spend huge sums of money.
That they previously didn't have with the municipal councils and the county councils.
Exactly. Huge sums of money in a fairly short period of time. There's political pressure to deliver. So the sense is, okay, let's just spend and show that something is happening. In that process, the auditor will find that a lot of mistakes have been done and also a lot of theft has taken place. And one of the positive things that is happening is that is coming to light, that we can now engage with.
All right. Who do you think is championing the war on graft at the moment? You've rightly said here, persons from both sides of the political divide are being implicated. In fact, the Standard on Sunday today, had that headline talking about, 273 out of 290 legislators, embroiled in this CDF scam, if you like. It involves members of both sides of the political divide, others that many would not have expected, who came in perhaps with the promise from the religious sector, with the promise of, sort of cleaning up the politics. So do you get a sense that this is being led by anyone? Is there one person who we can say, this is the champion, this is who we rally behind? Or are we just all groping in the dark and everybody, for himself?
In a country like ours, one would expect to be able to rally behind the top leadership, those you've elected to the top leadership around an issue that is as urgent and as massive, both economically and politically. You'd expect the top leadership to be the ones to lead it. Clearly they're not. We have a culture of impunity and permissiveness that has spread throughout the country, that I talked to you about, that I mentioned earlier. And that has created this environment where people feel they can't get away with anything. That we have appropriated, for example, a term, which is a South African term, of the tenderpreneur. We didn't talk about tenderpreneurs 8 years ago, or 5 years ago. It's come in. It's a South African term of people who have got no fixed capacity or ability. What they do is they broker and trade in relationships to get contracts to basically extract resources from or public resources, whether it's at the county or national level, which they just steal, and nothing really happens to them. And the whole process of being investigated, being taken to court, unfortunately also has become theater. It no longer has the kind of legitimacy and credibility in the eyes of Kenyans. So Kenyans see somebody is being taken to court for ABCD, they dismiss that. They say, we know nothing is going to happen. And that kind of cynicism is the thing that leadership helps to stop. Look at a country, and this is an issue that has been raised and has caused controversy. Look at a country like Tanzania. New president, no grand strategy, big policy reform agenda, just basically goes out and deals with the issue directly. And what that does is inspire our population, just inspire ordinary citizens whose attitude toward this issue therefore changes. That creates an environment in which the policies can then work.
It's interesting that you mentioned, President Magufuli, because there's some that take issue with the manner in which he is dealing with corruption, that it's a one-man show, that it is not constitutional, that he is not perhaps strengthening institutions, structures and systems that will outlive his administration. And so some say that's probably not the way to go, and that we have structures and institutions through which President Uhuru Kenyatta, his counterpart, has worked through and is perhaps receiving some sort of, frustration. Because he talked about the judiciary, the police, and that's something that they say civil society isn't talking about, some of the gaps we have within the police, within the judiciary, where all of these cases go and, they're not prosecuted, we don't see convictions. Surely the president has no control over what happens in the courts.
Yvonne, you buy a car, you choose it, you buy it, you start it, you're the one who has to drive it, and you have to make it work, and you do what it takes to make that car work. We fight this battle with what we have. And yes, the criticisms that have been raised with regard to the institutionalization of the fight in places like Tanzania. But we've seen public confidence with regard to what the president is doing there remaining quite high. The same thing applied to President Sankara in Burkina Faso. The same thing applied to President Nyerere in Tanzania. They had another quality that was extremely important in terms of ordinary, and this is a very African thing. If Africans believe that you and if you're president or prime minister or deputy president or prime minister or whatever, if you're a top leader, and ordinary Africans believe that you're a thief, not corrupt is a bit of an abstract word, that you're a thief, and that your family is also got thieves there, that you're involved in theft, or you're allowing them to steal, then even the institutions that your own people lead don't function, because people know that a climate has been created that allows them to get away with this. And that when you look at the one single characteristic amongst all these leaders, whether from West Africa to East Africa to President Mandela in South Africa, individually you could not point to what they stole or what they allowed their families to steal. And that is extremely important for that to be dealt with, which is the reason I raised the issue of we've got to deal with this conflict of interest matter that has emerged under this administration that affects, I think, all the political leadership, whether it's in those who are in power and those that are in the opposition, because it degrades public confidence in their leaders tremendously.
And so you're tying this degradation of public confidence to the work of the judiciary, to the work of the police. What are the inefficiencies in that system, in those areas, along this chain of the war on graft?
I think if one looks at Kenya's entire judicial chain from the Supreme Court down to the prisons, more reform work has been done in Kenya since 1991 in all those institutions, whether the DPP's office, creating the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We're in the fourth permutation of it right now. Yeah. We've created and transformed so many institutions. We were, I think, second or third country in the world to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We ratified the African Union Convention Against Corruption. In terms of creating the institutions, the body of laws, we've done extremely well, and we've been quick to do it. But in terms of doing what it takes to inculcate in ourselves a culture, traditions, norms that affect the way we behave with regard to positions of public trust, we've gone in the opposite direction.
Yeah,
and that's why I said that we've reached more or less the limit in terms of this public sector reform model, and that it requires a political action to give it
you've
energy.
talked about the commissions. We've seen them all. Kenya Anti-Corruption Authority, the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission. None of the persons that have been at the helm of these anti-corruption agencies, including the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission that we have now, have lived to see any success. Do we need a commission? A specific one that fights graft? Corruption is an economic crime. Surely can't the CID not investigate, the DPP prosecutes, and we just, get this over and done with? Is it necessary, a commission on graft?
Well, it was felt to be necessary, and from my position in civil society in the early 1990s, I was a big proponent of us creating specialized anti-corruption bodies, changing the anti-corruption law, Chapter 65, and creating a more robust piece of legislation that defined economic crimes more specifically.
And trying to make it about ethics, that traditional that you're talking about,
Well,
which is why we call it now the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
And which if we are done, I think we have to accept that we have made some mistakes, and sometimes that's quite difficult.
What mistakes?
And I think, though, for me, one mistake that we made was the reason we created these, it was then the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, became Anti-Corruption Police Unit, Kenya Anti-Corruption Authority, etc. It's got 4 different permutations. Now, the reason we created it is because the Office of the Attorney General, the State Law Office, which included the DPP, the Prosecutions Department, were not prosecuting, and the police were not investigating. And therefore we said, now this becomes such a problem, we're going to create a specialized institution.
Right, where you can channel resources, energy, ideas, effort,
So we sort of went around the problem. Whereas maybe what we should have done is concentrate our attention, energy, and political will and capital at the time in fixing the Attorney General's office, in fixing the police, to ensure that they're able to deal with these issues. We're still going to have to do it now. We're still going to have to fix some of these institutions. So I think that's an important lesson.
So do we fix the commission, or do we just do away with it?
It's up to Kenyans. If it's not working, and if we should ask ourselves, if the police and the Attorney General's office and the DPP's office work properly, would we need this institution?
What do you think, John?
Well, I think it would become redundant. If these other institutions work, it would become redundant. But now, it's written into the Constitution, so it's a much more complex set of issues. However, we also wrote into law pieces of legislation that touched on ethics, and we haven't given enough energy to that. We've always pushed very hard for prosecution, frying the big fish. However, in Kenya, the big fish are the politicians running the country. And that's just the truth. And the big fish are in the top of our political lake in the whole political lineup. So you're not going to expect big fish to fry themselves. However, using the kind of ethics legislation that we have, I think it's possible to be able to use a kind of vetting that we've seen with the police, which it's a telling that hasn't been that effective. Lifestyle audits, ensuring that we do audits of the top leaders and their families, because that's causing a sucking out of confidence in their. They talk about fighting corruption. You find people don't believe them. People don't trust them because of the perceived behavior of people around them. And we have the instruments to fix that in terms of the ethics-related legislation that is in place, and we haven't used it. Plus, again, I say, as Africans, the ethics-related instruments that we have are perhaps more culturally acceptable to us. People would much prefer to have the money that has been stolen from Kenyans paid back.
When we speak about ethics, because it's interesting, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one, because you are the permanent secretary in the office of the president in charge of governance and ethics. So tell us, what was the magic then? You know, I mean, there was a lot of euphoria, there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of push for accountability, for good governance, for transparency, and you were at the heart of that, really, you know, based in State House. What was the magic then? When did we lose it? And how do we get that magic back? Maybe, you know, this is a twofold question. What did we lose? How do we get it back? And what are the solutions going forward as we conclude our discussion?
I think the magic then was the different political parties in the opposition had come together around an anti-corruption platform. They had been elected with a significant majority. We had a peaceful transition of power, and ordinary Kenyans were extremely excited and supportive of the government's efforts to fight corruption. So really, the real energy to fight corruption in the first 8 months of the Kibaki regime came from the people. In fact, when I was in office as permanent secretary, one of my first challenges was dealing with provincial police officers around the country, telephoning because ordinary Kenyans were arresting policemen who were asking for bribes. And they would arrest them and take them to the police station. And so these PPOs would call to ask, okay, what do we do? I said, you prosecute them. So that kind of ground up fight against corruption, that was the magic that we had. That's what allowed us to achieve what we did in those
Kenyans don't have that magic anymore? Why? Where did they lose it?
Deep cynicism. First of all, as the politicians lied, leaders lied, number one. Number two, reformers, people that you and I and others looked up to as people maybe who have been in civil society, in the church, and other places, as people of integrity who are going to be beacons of good governance and ethics and the way government in public affairs are run. Just to put it bluntly, they became crooks. They joined the gravy train. That's very disheartening when you see people that you knew, people who 10 years ago were shouting, we want transparency, accountability, mageuzi, and all they're doing is buying land, buying cars, marrying extra wives, etc., etc. And that's very disheartening. And ordinary people see that extremely quickly. Not only they see it, they feel it. Kenyans are an extremely interesting people in that.
So what do we do? Is there a silver bullet then? You're talking about it from the ground up.
Yeah.
So as we conclude, and I want to give you a minute or less if you can. I know there's no silver bullet, or is there? What is that one thing that would happen in this country at the top, at the bottom, in between, to start to, give us some success?
Well, I think two things immediately. First of all, the kind of concentrated attention by the media, like you are doing with your 47 days, by civil society. It would be good to get the churches back on board. It would be good for the private sector to also recover their credibility and be able to speak authoritatively about that. That I think is extremely, just keeping that pressure up is extremely important. Where we've reached in terms of a climate of wide-scale plunder and theft, it requires the top leadership to be very open about the business practices of themselves, their families, and to be transparent and open about it, because Kenyans have lost confidence in them. And so even when they talk about corruption, no matter how they whine and moan about it, Kenyans don't believe them.
All right, thank you very much. John Githongo, CEO, Inuka Trust. Do you agree with him? He says corruption is a fancy word. It really is about plunder. That's what it is. And do you agree with him? Do you think this has all become too fancy? Have you lost the fight against corruption from the bottom up? Do you believe your leaders? In fact, do you believe leaders from either side are able to steer the war on graft successfully? for this country. All right, so it's that time of the show where we take a look at the number of the week that we like you to focus on. And today we're focusing on matters in the security sector and taking a look at a comparison between the number of private security guards and police officers that help to keep citizens like you and I secure. So here's an interesting one, and these are facts coming out of the security sector, and we have confirmed this with PROSAC, which is the Private Security Protective and Safety Association of Kenya. Now, it is estimated in the country that there are 350,000 security guards versus about 90 to 100,000 police officers, give or take. This means that there are 3 times more private security guards than there are police officers. And all of these 350,000 security guards are from 20,000 security companies. In fact, it's over 20,000 security companies that are registered in Kenya. What's this about? Well, we got some reaction from PROSAC on this number, and they talk about it being due to a surge in growth of population and, of course, the disparity in terms of growth of trained and serving police officers. And they say, this may be a good thing, and it indicates increase of assets and commercial and private business interests in the country that has driven this demand for larger numbers of private security guards. So you have 3 times more private security guards than you do police officers. What's the ratio for police officers to citizens? And this is important because each of us pay taxes to be kept safe by police officers. If you want to be kept extra safe by private security guards, you would have to pay more. Now, a lot of Kenyans do not have the ability to do that. This is the ratio we're looking at present in Kenya. 1 policeman for 550 citizens in the country. What is the UN recommendation? It is 1 to 400. That is where we should be ideally. Some may say we're there already because private security guards are more. But when you think about it, how many Kenyans can afford extra private security? So in other words, in this country, to be safe, you've got to be able to pay for it over and above the taxes that you pay. Well, this is an interesting scenario because one thing is for sure, we need to make the police service more lucrative to be able to absorb more numbers and more training. But there's also the idea that CCTV and technology is coming in to help police officers. But does that substitute boots on the ground and men and women walking the streets to keep you safe? Something for us to consider as we look towards getting the country secure. Surely 3 private security guards for every 1 policeman. If you take a look at that ratio, something definitely needs to be done. That's your number for this week. All right, on Lest We Forget tonight, we want to take you back 4 years ago, on the 3rd of December 2012, which is, 4 years ago, Uhuru Kenyatta, who was then Deputy Prime Minister, and William Ruto, who was Eldoret North MP, formally announced their union in what was termed a marriage with Ruto as the bride. So this was ahead of the 2013 elections, and you can take a look at those pictures now, the following year in March. So if you can take a look at that picture, let's just pause and take a look at this picture. This happened 4 years ago on the eve of the elections in this country. This was when they formally announced that. My, how things change in 4 years. Lest we forget, the two had been indicted for crimes against humanity at the time. Those cases, as we all know, have since been dismissed. And many say those cases are the ones that brought them together. Uhuru for his role as member in PNU, and Ruto while he was in ODM. Now, if it was a surprise to some at the time that this union happened, it shouldn't have been, for these two had been on the same side before. So, lest we forget, we want to take you further back to 2002. Uhuru Kenyatta was then the KANU presidential candidate. He lost to Mwai Kibaki. Take a look at this concession speech, and you will see William Ruto right behind him.
I accept the choice of the people, and in particular, now concede that Mr. Mwai Kibaki will be the 3rd president of the Republic of Kenya.
Back to present day, they are still together. The vehicle is a bit different now. No longer an alliance of 2 equals as it was termed then, but one party, the Jubilee Party. So what will it be in 2022? One thing's for sure in politics, nothing is permanent. Never forget that. Let's talk sports now. Strathmore University Gladiators are the new National Hockey Premier League champions after edging out the defending champions Butali Sugar Warriors 3-0 in a hotly contested final match played at City Park Stadium in Nairobi. Orange Telkom were also crowned the Ladies Premier League champions at the same venue.
After waiting for almost 15 hours to know who will be crowned the 2016 champions of the Kenya Hockey League, after the match between Strathmore University and defending champions Butali Sugar was abandoned due to heavy rains, finally a new champion was unveiled. With both teams each boasting a goal after the final minutes, the match had to be decided on a penalty shootout. Butali Sugar failed to convert their penalties, while the varsity side had Derek Kuloba, Francis Kariuki and Dan Onyango sounding the boards to give Strathmore the 2016 championship, a first since 2009.
They have more than what we have, but we had a bigger heart than them, I think, in this game. And I think probably we wanted it a lot more than they did.
Game imekuwa poa, though they are a better side than us, but we had to try. Kwa sababu most of them walikuwa our former players, so we look up to them.
I think we met a very formidable champion, now champion, but we didn't make use of our chances. If we did, we'd have locked down this game a long time ago. But then again, it's an awakening call for our boys.
Strathmore will now shift focus to the Africa Club Championship that will take place next year.
We know that there is a tough task ahead for the club champs next year, so we will not start preparing then. We'll start preparing now.
2016 Women's Premier League champions Orange Telkom received the championship trophy at the same venue despite winning the league a month ago. Strathmore Scorpions also collected the runners-up trophy. Moses Ademba of Multimedia University was named the Male Hockey Player of the Year as Yvonne Karanja collected the Female Hockey Player of the Year gong. Willis Okey of Kenya Police was the best scorer in the Hockey Premier League with 9 goals.
Wesley Korir was the man of the day, winning the 800 meters, 400 meters and walking race as the 7th edition of the East African Interparliamentary Games kicked off in Mombasa County. Uganda bullied their Kenyan counterparts to take the tug-of-war title. Moses Wahisi reports.
The 7th edition of the East Africa Interparliamentary Games started on a high tone for the Kenyan team, with Wesley Korir winning the walking race before bagging the 400 meters and the 800 meters races, beating Ugandan Matekwea Gata, who finished second.
It was good, 800 meter. I ran a record which lasted for 20 years in the United States. So having me being 40 years to compete still, I love it.
We have been called ambassadors of this country for so many years. Let's practically now become ambassadors of our people. So that's what my message to all runners is: get into leadership.
In the tug of war, the Ugandan party had the final laugh, securing a 2-1 win over the Kenyan Member of Parliament.
I think we have prepared adequately. And in occasions that Uganda has defeated us, it has not been that bad defeat because it is just a few mistakes that we make. And normally they have just defeated us with 1 goal against 0. But this time around, we have learned our mistakes and we will be more careful to play them because we really want to win this.
The one of the game brought together 6 member states of the East African community who are geared to strengthen their ties.
Issue of parties, we don't give. Nobody wants to know because now if we want to go into parties, do we know which party is represented in Tanzania? Here is the Parliament of Kenya, Parliament of Uganda, Parliament of Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and the East African Legislative Assembly.
1 week is going to be a great week for us as East African parliamentarians to showcase of how sport is very useful as a tool of integration.
Kenya tops the standings after day 1 action, but Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda are poised to star in the coming days. Day 1 of the Interparliamentary East African Games has been competitive for a fair share, and tomorrow's action is expected to be more spicy, where the Kenyan football team is going to go up against Uganda, while the Kenyan ladies are going to play in a volleyball match against Uganda. Moses Wahesi, KTN Sport.
All right, time for my take tonight, and it is all about the feedback we have received throughout the week on our coverage of county corruption, which we are calling 47 Days of Accountability. Obviously, there are people who appreciate this small effort to remind the country that corruption is pervasive and that it is no respecter of political party or region. But then some have seen our coverage as some kind of tactic to deflect attention from the billions that are being stolen at the national level, and that the national government holds 85% of the funds, while only a mere 15% goes to the counties. Now, I don't know about you, but I find this dichotomy of small versus big corruption quite absurd. The fact is that this coverage is not a choice between the counties and the national government. The mindset that makes people steal public resources is the same. The policeman who takes a 50-shilling bribe on the roadside will steal billions if he or she were in charge of the standard gauge railway. The procurement officer who tilts contracts in favor of those who bribe him may auction State House if he were president. Equally, the governor who steals millions will definitely steal billions if he got a chance. Just because the sums of money we are reporting seem paltry in comparison to the billions you are used to hearing about at the national government does not make it any less abominable. Does 47 days of accountability make some people uncomfortable? Sure it does. Should it make us uncomfortable? Of course it should. Because it is only when you leave your comfort zone that change begins to happen. Now, for far too long, it has been easy to refer to corruption as that vice that is happening over there, to those people, being perpetrated by the other people. Now, the reality is closer home thanks to devolution. But, ladies and gentlemen, corruption is not what the 20 Constitution intended. We will only win when we account for every cent, be it 2 million shillings, 2 billion shillings, at the county level, at the national level, and even at your local markets. One other way we win is by calling it what it is. You know, in Africa, we are fond of euphemisms, a respectful way of referring to touchy issues in society. Now, we may have transferred this to the war on this vice. We have baptized it with all these fanciful monikers like graft, corruption, lack of integrity, and so on. But let's call it what it is. Corruption is theft. If you are corrupt, you are a thief. Period. And that is my take tonight. Thanks tonight for your views, and every night. My name is Yvonne Okwara Matole. Our sign language interpreter was William Silla.